Many locals knew Jordan Neely. He liked to hang out in Times Square, where he would perform, dressed up like Michael Jackson. The side slide, the crotch grab, and the moonwalk were his signature moves. Law enforcement and public health officials also knew him. He'd been arrested more than 40 times, mostly for petty offenses, such as loitering and trespassing. He had a history of mental illness, and that Monday afternoon he had reportedly been throwing garbage at other passengers. Reflecting on the incident, the inpatient psychiatrist, who has worked in hospitals in New York for more than 15 years, told me, "A couple months ago, a mentally ill man threw a juice box at my kid in the subway at Union Square, where there was a police presence, and no one intervened. The man walked out of the station. Neely was killed. It's just very strange, the arbitrariness of it," he said. The psychiatrist went on to tell me that Neely had been involuntarily hospitalized at Bellevue in 2021. Neely was admitted to the hospital's forensic psychiatry unit on the 19th floor, where doctors and nurses treat patients who have been recently arrested or incarcerated on Rikers Island. Then, like so many other patients, Neely walked out of the hospital and onto the street. For a while, he lived at a homeless shelter. Sometimes, he stayed with his Aunt Carolyn and her wife, Whitney, at their apartment in Washington Heights, near where he grew up. In January, the two moved upstate, and Neely decided not to go. He said that he didn't want to burden them. In early April, outreach workers spotted him on the subway. He urinated in front of them, and they called the police. Carolyn told the Post that she had tried for years to get judges and doctors to help. The whole system just failed him, she said. He fell through the cracks. There are more than 200,000 residents of New York City living with severe mental illness. Roughly 5% of them are homeless. That's 13,000 people with schizophrenia, major depressive and bipolar disorders, or other significant mental or behavioral health diagnoses, all of whom regularly spend the night at a shelter, in the subway, on the street. They're the ones you recognize, the people whom, for the past 50 years, every mayor has either tried to help, harass, or hide from view. Rudy Giuliani's cops were known to chase people out of Midtown, forcing them into the Bronx and Queens. Michael Bloomberg largely avoided public initiatives that addressed mental illness. Bill de Blasio allocated almost $1 billion for a mental health plan, but it was criticized for failing to track outcomes or prioritize treatment for those who needed help the most. Last November, Adams, citing a crisis we see all around us, announced at a press conference that homeless people with mental illness would be removed from the streets and the subways, against their will, if necessary, by the police and other city employees. Advocates were outraged. Norman Siegel, the former head of the New York Civil Liberties Union and a longtime friend of the mayor, said, "Just because someone smells, because they haven't had a shower for weeks, because they're mumbling, because their clothes are disheveled, that doesn't mean they're a danger to themselves or others." Rumors spread quickly. Were the police about to start rounding up people who simply appeared to be mentally ill? How many were going to be detained? 2 weeks later, lawyers sought to halt the initiative. In a courtroom downtown, an attorney for the city, who was defending the mayor's plan, said, "As far as anyone in this room knows, the initiative hasn't changed anything." The judge asked, "So the purpose of the press conference was to do what?" "To announce the fact that the mayor is taking the initiative of providing further guidance to the agencies about what is permitted under current law so that they can take action to protect New Yorkers under circumstances that the law permits." Adams's policy, in other words, was more of the same. In 1987, Mayor Ed Koch announced a broad interpretation of New York state law that permitted him to hospitalize the loonies and crazies around town. In the decades since, police and EMS workers have regularly transported homeless people with apparent mental illness to hospitals against their will. That's just part of the job. Violent crime, parking tickets, heart attacks, the unsheltered woman in a wheelchair at Penn Station who is taken to Bellevue every few months after creating a public disturbance, the man with 4 large black suitcases who was picked up for zigzagging through traffic in Brooklyn and sent to the psychiatric emergency room at Kings County Hospital, the woman with schizophrenia who believes that the French government bought a church on Fifth Avenue and granted her the legal right to live there. One EMT, who has worked on ambulance crews across the city for the past 20 years, told me, "If the person is out of their mind, if you can see the person is not all there, The police will call for us, and we'll come and take them. In the course of reporting this article, I interviewed dozens of EMTs, paramedics, police officers, nurses, social workers, emergency room doctors, and inpatient psychiatrists, most of whom requested anonymity in order to speak openly about the people in their care. Here's how it happens. An EMT and her partner park the ambulance, cops call it the bus, and evaluate the scene for safety. Does the individual have a weapon? Where's the nearest egress? Then she'll put on a pair of purple nitrile gloves and make a cautious approach. She'll say, "What's going on today, sir?" Or, "Ma'am, how are you feeling tonight?" The person might respond with a mumble, a shout, or the formality you'd expect in a job interview. Often, the person will say, "I don't want to tell you my name." So the EMT will smile and offer her own. She'll say, "You're not in trouble. I just want to know why you're standing in the middle of the road. Can you come with me to the sidewalk, please? I'm here to listen." Or maybe the person is already ripping the hair from his head and trying to escape the encounter by tossing the EMT's stretcher into the street. In that case, a paramedic can use a cotton sling to tie the patient's wrists to his ankles and inject a drug, such as the sedative midazolam or the anesthetic ketamine. But not every ambulance crew has a paramedic. One might be 10 or 20 minutes out, so in the meantime, the EMT, who isn't allowed to inject those drugs, will have to get creative. You want cake? You want cookies? You want a cigarette? Lies and threats, carrots and sticks. Anything to get them on their way to the nearest hospital. The EMT told me, "I don't want to use the word manipulative, but you have to figure out a way to just fucking get them in the ambulance." At the hospital, the patient is evaluated by a team of nurses and doctors in the emergency department. In New York City, this happens 70,000 times a year. A little more than half of these patients, the ones in the worst shape, are then taken to the psychiatric unit. The hospital's job is to evaluate, stabilize, treat, discharge. Just as you don't depart the ICU while you're having a stroke or bleeding out, you don't leave the psychiatric unit while you're in the throes of psychosis. Some people stay for months before being transferred to a state-run psychiatric hospital. Others are discharged after only a few days, or are never admitted at all. Every day at Bellevue, the largest city-run hospital, there are usually about 5 or 6 patients downstairs in the psychiatric emergency department, waiting for a bed. The average stay in the psychiatric unit is 13 days. One reason hospitals discharge people so quickly is that there are not enough inpatient psychiatric beds. High-quality psychiatric care is not as profitable as specialized spinal surgeries and hernia repairs. Almost every patient who comes in this way has a serious underlying condition: bipolar disorder, major depression, schizophrenia. That even a couple of weeks surrounding